Today's episode is brought to you by Amazon. Please go to lookingbackpodcast.weebly.com. Anytime you want to purchase something from Amazon, click the banner on the front page, and out of whatever you buy, a small percentage comes back to this show, and it's a great way to help out. Thanks so much, and enjoy this episode of Looking Back. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Looking Back. The previous episodes, we were talking about the year of the four emperors. Before that was the Julio Claudian dynasty. And today, we're going to talk about a dynasty known as the Flavian. That ruled the Roman Empire between 69 AD and 96 AD, and that included the reigns of Vespasian, his two sons Titus and Domitian. The Flavians rose to power during the civil war of 69, known as the Year of the Four Emperors. After Galba and Otho died, Vitellius became emperor in the middle of 69 AD. His claim to the throne was quickly challenged by legions stationed in the eastern provinces, who declared their commander, Vespasian, emperor in his place. The Second Battle of Bedriacum tilted the balance decisively in favor of the Flavian forces, who entered Rome on December 20th. The following day, the Roman Senate officially declared Vespasian emperor of the Roman Empire, commencing the Flavian dynasty. Although it was short-lived, several significant historic, economic, and military events took place during their reign, and we will get into some of those in a little bit. But first, a little bit of history of the Flavians before we get into the dynasty itself. Decades of civil war during the 1st century BC contributed greatly to the demise of the old aristocracy of Rome, which was replaced gradually by a new Italian nobility during the early part of the 1st century AD. One such family were the Flavians, who rose from relative obscurity to prominence in just 4 generations. They acquired wealth and status under the emperors of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Vespasian's grandfather, Titus Flavius Petro, had served as centurion under Pompey during Caesar's civil war. His military career ended in disgrace when he fled the battlefield at the Battle of Pharsalus in 46 BC. However, nonetheless, Petro managed to improve his status by marrying the extremely wealthy Tertulla, whose fortune guaranteed the upward mobility of his son Titus Flavius Sabinus. Sabinus himself gathered further wealth and possible equestrian status during his services as tax collector in Asia and banker in Helvetia, which is now modern-day Switzerland. By marrying Vespasia Pola, he allied himself to the more prestigious patrician, ensuring the elevation of his sons, Titus Flavius Sabinus II and Vespasian, to the senatorial rank. At around 38 AD, Vespasian married Domitia the Elder, the daughter of an equestrian from Ferentinum, and they had 2 sons, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, who was born in 39 AD, and Titus Flavius Dominatius, born in 51, and a daughter, Domitia, born in 45. Domitia the Elder died before Vespasian became emperor, therefore, and thereafter, his mistress Caenis was his wife in all but name until she died in 74. The political career of Vespasian included the offices of quaestor, of aedile, and of praetor. A little bit of background on those three. Quaestor is someone who supervises the financial affairs of the state and conducted audits. In the Roman Empire, that was an elected official, but in the Roman Empire, in the Republic actually, that was elected. In the Empire, it was appointed. The term aedile, Aedile, is people who are responsible for the maintenance of public buildings and regulating the festivals. There were two pairs. Um, the two were aedile plebis, and the other two were called aediles curulus, and they were open to both the plebes and to patricians. They basically were in charge of making sure the buildings maintained their form, make sure that they were, I guess you could say, okay, making sure they didn't crumble. Basically, in charge of the maintenance of the public buildings and the festivals that were going on. And praetor, Praetor, that term um, is a title granted by the government of Rome to men acting in one of two official capacities: the commanders of an army or an elected magistrate, basically an elected official. And that were the three: Quaestor, Aedile, and Praetor. And that culminated with the consulship in 51, the year that Domitian was born. As a military commander, he gained early renown by participating in the Roman invasion of Britain in 43. Nevertheless, ancient sources allege poverty for the Flavian family at the time of Domitian's upbringing, even claiming Vespasian had fallen into disrepute under the emperors Caligula and Nero, who we talked about in a previous episode. Modern history has now refuted those claims, suggesting that those stories were later circulated under Flavian rule as part of a propaganda campaign to diminish success under the less reputable emperors of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and also to maximize achievements under the Emperor Claudius and his son Britannicus. By all appearances, imperial favor for the Flavians was high throughout the 40s and 60s, and while Titus received a court education in the company of Britannicus, Vespasian pursued a successful political and military career. Following a prolonged period of retirement during the 50s, he returned to public office under Nero, serving as proconsul of the Africa province in 63 and accompanying the emperor during an official tour of Greece in 66. From 57 to 59, Titus was a military tribune in Germania and later served in Britannia. His first wife, Aracina Tertulla, died 2 years after their marriage in 65. Titus then took a new wife of a more distinguished family, that family being Marcia Furnia. However, her family was closely linked to the opposition to Emperor Nero, and her uncle Barreius Soranus and his daughter Servia were among those who were killed after the failed Pisonian conspiracy of 65. Some modern historians theorize that Titus divorced his wife because of her family's connection to the conspiracy. He never remarried, and he appears to have had multiple daughters, at least one of them by Marcia Furnia. The only the only one known to have survived to adulthood was Julia Flavia, perhaps Titus's child, by Aracina, whose mother was also named Julia. During this period, Titus also practiced law and attained the rank of quaestor, the person in charge of um, what we talked about before, the guy that's in charge of financial means, basically the treasury in Rome. In 66 AD, the Jews of the Judea province revolted against the Roman Empire. Castius Gallus, the legate of Syria, was forced to retreat from Jerusalem and defeated at the Battle of Beth Horon. The pro-Roman king Agrippa II and his sister Berenice fled the city to Galilee, where they later gave themselves up to the Romans. Nero appointed Vespasian to put down the rebellion, who was dispatched to the region at once with the 5th and 10th legions. He was later joined by Titus at Ptolemy, bringing with him the 15th legion. With a strength of 60,000 professional soldiers, the Romans quickly swept across Galilee and by 68 marched on Jerusalem. I want to talk about the rise of power of the Flavians. On June 9th of 68 AD, amidst growing opposition of the Senate and the army, Nero committed suicide, and with him the Julio-Claudian dynasty came to an end. Because of that, chaos ensued, leading to a year of brutal civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors, during which the four most influential generals of the Roman Empire, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, successively vied for imperial power. News of Nero's death reached Vespasian as he was preparing to besiege the city of Jerusalem, and almost simultaneously, the Senate had declared Galba, then governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, which is now modern day Spain, as Emperor of Rome. Rather than continue his campaign, Vespasian decided to await further orders and send Titus to greet the new emperor. Before reaching Italy, however, Titus learned that Galba had been murdered and replaced by Otho, the governor of Lusitania, which is now modern day Portugal. At the same time, Vitellius and his armies in Germania had risen in revolt, and they prepared to march on Rome, intent to overthrow Otho. Not wanting to risk being taken hostage by one side or the other, Titus abandoned his journey to Rome and rejoined his father in Judea. Otho and Vitellius realized the potential threat posed by the Flavian faction, and with four legions at his disposal, Vespasian commanded a strength of nearly 80,000 soldiers. His position in Judea further granted him the advantage of being nearest to the vital province of Egypt, which controlled the grain supply to Rome during that time. His brother Titus Flavius Sabinus II, as prefect of the city, commanded the entire garrison of Rome in the city. Tensions among the Flavian troops ran high, but as long as Galba and Otho remained in power, Vespasian refused to take action. When Otho was defeated by Vitellius at the first battle of Bedriacum, the armies in Judea and Egypt took matters in their own hands and declared Vespasian emperor on July 1st in the year 69. Vespasian agreed and accepted, and entered into an alliance with Gaius Licinius Maronicus, the governor of Syria, against Vitellius. A strong force drawn from the Judean and Syrian legions marched on to Rome under the command of Lucianus, while Vespasian himself traveled to Alexandria, leaving Titus in charge of ending the Jewish rebellion. In Rome, Domitian was placed under house arrest by Vitellius as a safeguard against any further and future Flavian aggression. Support for the old emperor was waning as more regions throughout the empire pledged their allegiance to Vespasian. On October 24th in the year 69, the forces of Vitellius and Vespasian clashed at the Second Battle of Bedriacum, which ended in a crushing defeat for the armies of Vitellius. In a desperate attempt, he tried to negotiate a surrender, and those terms of peace, which included a voluntary abdication, was agreed upon with Titus Flavius Sabinus II, but the soldiers of the Praetorian Guard considered a resignation disgraceful, and they prevented Vitellius from carrying out on the treaty. In the morning of December 18th, the emperor appealed to deposit the imperial insignia at the Temple of Concord, but at the last minute retraced his steps to the imperial palace. In the confusion, the leading men of the state gathered at Sabinus' house, proclaiming Vespasian emperor, but the multitude dispersed when Vitellian cohorts clashed with the armed escort of Sabinus, who was forced to retreat to Capitoline Hill. During the night, he was joined by his relatives, including Domitian. The armies of Mucianus were nearing Rome, but the besieged Flavian party did not hold out for longer than a day. On December 21st, the Senate proclaimed Vespasian emperor of the Roman Empire. Although the war had officially ended, a state of anarchy and lawlessness pervaded in the first days following the demise of Vitellius. Order was properly restored by Mucianus in the early 70s, who headed an interim government with Domitian as the representative of the Flavian family in the Senate. Upon receiving the tidings of his rival's defeat and death at Alexandria, the new emperor at once forwarded supplies of urgently needed grain to Rome, along with an edict or a declaration of policy in which he gave assurance of an entire reversal of the laws of Nero, especially those relating to treason. In early 70, Vespasian was still in Egypt, continuing to consolidate support from the Egyptians before departing. By the end of 70 AD, he finally returned to Rome and he was properly installed as emperor. we're going to stop there. On the next episode, we'll get into the actual Flavian dynasty, talking about the three men who ruled, also the administration at the time, their challenges they faced. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for all the wonderful support. And until next time, take care of yourself and each other.
That's the end of my show. Donk.